So I'm sticking with the theme of what started me down this journey and how I started prioritizing and putting forth a lot of effort to try and think better. So I kind of started with my business school experiences. That was, in my mind, the clear starting point where it started to change the way I think and started to open me up to different views, challenging my thinking more, etc. And then I spoke in the last video about why, a little bit more as to why I thought that was. The characteristics, the nature of the program and how I approached it and how that played into it. And ultimately getting to a question of, how do you scale something like this? How do you get other people, assuming you believe it's worthwhile, to pursue a similar journey? To say, I don't necessarily want to change my views. I want to pressure test them more. I want to be more thoughtful and more questioning to try and identify my blind spots, to try and make sure that I don't have biases or that I'm not making assumptions or looking at things from a narrow perspective, but rather I'd like to see the full objective view and get close to an objective truth. So if you believe that, how do you get people to do that? How do you push people in that way? And we talked about, it seems challenging because the nature of that is almost inherently confrontational, and it almost inherently puts people on the defensive. When you go to almost anybody and you say, hey, here I think there's a process or an approach to where you could think better right off the bat becomes a little bit confrontational. What are you saying? Are you saying I don't think well right now? You think you know better than me? You think you are better than me? It goes down a whole path where it forces people to become, or it seemingly forces people to become defensive. They've spent years and years and decades in many cases of their lives kind of hardening these mental defenses that protect them, protect their ego, protect their identity. They become very hardened in their views and how they think, and the longer you have those views, the more hardened it becomes, and becomes an extremely difficult fortress to try and break through. And it's very hard for somebody to recognize that, right? It takes a deep level of self-awareness and reflection and mental toughness to even accept the idea of humility that, you maybe have a need for it. And as I spoke about with me, it wasn't intentional. It was no great epiphany. I'm not some amazing person that got there. It just was a perfect storm of events at this, program I was in, using the case method and the way in which they did it and the consistency of it and the forced, humbling experience, all that stuff. So I say all that to say one of the things I brought up at the end of the last video was perhaps it's the age at which you start, which is the key. Perhaps it's trying to get to people at an age, perhaps an elementary school age, before those defenses harden and the fortress is built. At an age in which, ironically, children, first, second grade, whatever it is, third grade, elementary school, the thing that makes them so pure, that makes them so inherently good, seemingly, is also the risk factor because they don't have those defenses. They are open to many more things. If you don't fill it with the right skills and tools and training, not ideas, not beliefs. In no way am I suggesting that you take a second grader and you start teaching them, the truth about political policies or ideological beliefs. No, that's something they should figure out on their own and, through the right processes. What I'm saying is you need to start filling their brains to some extent with the tools, the knowledge, the skills of how to think, how to question more. Because again, the thing that makes them so open and pure and those defenses not being there, that hardened fortress not being in place, that's what leaves them susceptible to all the things that society brings, right? All the implicit biases and the subtle things that take root and formulate and form into beliefs and views and identity, ego, all that stuff. So perhaps the key is you have to get to them at an earlier age and try and teach them the skills then. So I wanted to give an example. I have a son who's in first grade going into second grade. I guess he's in second grade now. And I recognize the bias there, right? The idea that I'm saying that's the exact age in which you need to start teaching people, it's not lost on me that that's possibly, whatever you want to call it, recency bias or whatever, that's what I know. So maybe that's not the right age. I think some more thinking needs to be done on that, but let's go with it for a second. No surprise probably that I try and teach him a lot of these skills regularly. I try and teach him to question. I try and teach him to ask why. I try and teach him to see different perspectives. I try and teach him to not be so certain in his thinking. And I think those are the things you want to start to enable in a simple way, right? Not in a sophisticated way that they wouldn't understand, but just introduce the idea, entertain, allow them to entertain the possibility that things aren't as binary or black and white as it may seem at that age, right? They spend all day long or a lot of the day reading books or watching cartoons or TV shows, which is there's the good guy, there's the bad guy. It's all very simple. It's all very easy to them. Teach them that it's not that simple, right? An example, they're learning about American history. The way I learned it, the obvious way to learn it, is that Britain was the enemy. They were evil. They were an evil empire. And we, America, were the good ones, right? You can almost think of it like a Star Wars movie. There's the evil empire. There's Darth Vader and how evil he was. And then there's the good guys. Teaching them to understand that maybe there's more complexity and nuance to that. Perhaps had you lived in England or Great Britain at the time, you might have a different perspective and think that, hey, maybe we didn't do everything perfect, but we weren't this evil, horrific monsters that we're portrayed to be. Things like that, right? So a simple example that I did with my son the other day, which, because somebody might say, like, I kind of get what you're saying, but practically, how do you really do this at a level? Even understanding the dynamics of the American Revolution and the issues that were had of taxation without representation, that might be too complex. Maybe, I would argue you could probably do it in a simple way, but let me give you an even simpler approach, which I've tried, which I think maybe we can build on and use. So it's a simple one, and it's a somewhat silly one. But I was making my son lunch over the weekend, and he was having like a pizza and some mozzarella sticks. So we were heating them in our toaster oven, and we forgot to set the timer. So I think they were supposed to cook for 15 minutes, but we didn't keep track. So we knew we were around that time, but we weren't sure. So he was hungry, and he was eagerly looking at the toaster oven, and he called to me and said, "Dad, it's done. I know it's done. It's definitely done. Like, let's take it out." So I walked over, and to be honest, I wasn't sure. It's tricky with some of those things. You never really know. But he was adamant. It's definitely done, and he started giving me his explanation. The cheese looks melted, and it's been in for however long, and it's just I could just tell it's done. So I used that as an opportunity to say to him, listen, like, I get it. You're hungry. You want it to be done. So it seems like it's done. It seems very obvious to you that it's done. But I didn't say it this way, but in effect, I gave him a thought exercise. I said to him, listen, I'll go to the store right now and buy you any toy that you want, one toy, if you can convince me that that food is not done yet. And his first reaction was kind of confused, to be honest, because in his mind, he was like, but it is done, and I'm hungry, and it is done, so what are you even saying? So it took a little bit to explain. But when I explained to him, like, listen, I get you think it's done, but if you had to convince me that it wasn't, give me your best shot at that. Give me your best argument, right? And there's a reward here to be had if you can do it. So it was trying to motivate him to do it, right? Give him a reason to overcome the other motivation, which is, I'm freaking hungry. So once he got it, he said, okay, well, the cheese is melted, but it's not all melted. I see some pieces that maybe could melt a little bit more. And the mozzarella sticks, normally when they're done, like, you start to see a little cheese busting out of them because it's gotten so hot. And I don't see that yet. So he started giving me reasons as to why it wasn't done. And it was great. It was exactly what I was looking for, because what I was trying to introduce to him in that simple, silly way was your mind will tell you at times if you're motivated for whatever reason it be, greed, money, hunger, even sometimes it's good stuff that you assume I'm trying to help people. Your mind will be motivated to convince you that there is an absolute certainty there. In this case, that food is absolutely done. And that's what you will say, and that's what you will argue as vehemently as you have to, because that's what you want. I'm trying to teach him, and in this case, trying to give him the understanding, to entertain the possibility that there's another perspective. And if you trick your mind, in this case, into forcing it to look at it that other way, you can make a pretty strong argument for that too. So even in just that little moment, hopefully, and you have to do it consistently, it's not a one-off thing, but there's a realization of like, there is another way. I could see it not being done. As certain as I was, there is a scenario where maybe it's not. And if I just change the lens a little bit, well, now maybe I actually believe it's not done. And again, there's a little bit of games there and trickery in terms of buying the toy. So he was motivated for it, but that's the idea. We can't always assume that we understand our motivations and emotions and that we have them in control and we're making the most rational decision. It's allowing him to see when my motivation changed, all of a sudden logic changes. Well, that can't be. So how do I develop that? And it's a journey, but that's an example of how you might start to teach kids at that age these types of skills so that when the stakes are much higher, when they're older and maybe their friends are making some off comment racist remarks, or somebody's arguing about, whatever it is, something that is subtly starting to form a view or a belief in their head. They hear their parents talking about something. They're more likely to say, well, I hear that and I understand that that might be true, but there may be some other side to it. That's ultimately what you're trying to achieve.